This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Riverside today. We are joined by Angelov Farooq. He is a trustee with the Riverside Unified School Board, and you recently traveled to Washington, D.C.
Yes.
As part of your involvement with the National Coalition of Restorative Justice, met with members of the outgoing administration.
Yes.
Talk to us about the organization and about what you discussed in Washington.
So Ollie Cooper is actually the head of the National Coalition, and I'm involved in the leadership efforts to support him and his vision. But we really are trying to advance information about best practices on how to deal with alternative discipline. There's this whole school to prison pipeline phenomenon, and it starts at an early age and it just compounds itself. And so we want to get intervention. We want to uncover these biases.
Let's talk about school to prison,
Yeah.
because that pipeline is absolutely daunting. And I learned that what the demographers will often do when looking at prison construction is they'll look at third grade reading scores, and they'll know based upon those scores how many kids are going to wind up in prison.
Well, and that's why literacy for our school board, we've made that a very high priority. But even separate from that, I would say just the nature of the propensity for students of color to be disciplined for the same type of behavior that others are at higher rates and greater degrees of punishment.
It's undeniable.
Those are things we have to address.
I mean, we have seen studies. We have watched, I remember watching a study, it was on one of those news magazines, where a teacher who seemed to have little to no bias would discipline people either gender or ethnicity differently for the same behavior.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why we're just trying to have honest conversations. Our school district has made a district-wide commitment on this effort, and we're in the process of training our teachers on these unconscious and conscious biases that people have.
And what's so hard is really, it's more the unconscious bias.
Course, yeah.
Conscious bias is almost
Of
easy.
course.
That's easy to deal with. You know,
It's
you
tangible.
See, it's
Yeah.
tangible, but how do we address that? Because people don't want to admit, that they have biases.
And the important thing is obviously we want people to start acknowledging these things, but the most important thing is that even if they're just aware of things, it starts altering their behavior.
Right.
And so at a minimum, that's a step in the right direction.
I want to talk more about what you learned at the conference, what you take away from it, and whether we could see positive change, though, in light of the new administration.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of opportunities on a national level. A Department of Labor, and I serve on the Governor's Workforce Development Board, we are looking at even having training efforts for people that have been former offenders in these different discipline contexts.
But I'm wondering if your efforts are best utilized in Sacramento versus Washington, D.C., given what the incoming administration has said. And I'm not commenting on it one way or the other, but it seems as if Sacramento may be more amenable to your message than Washington.
So I think we are prepared for that. I mean, I never want to concede something that I think will have a true impact from a humanitarian perspective. So I'm not necessarily going to give up on that, but I will acknowledge that we are making the statewide efforts a little bit more of a priority right now.
I want to talk more about those biases because I was recently reading in the wake of the election, the national election, what some students were feeling, especially students of color, and especially students of Latino descent. I read one student, a fifth grader, at LAUSD said to her teacher the day after the election, "People really don't like us." Crushing. It's crushing to hear a 10-year-old say that to her teacher simply because she perceived that the national election results suggested that the majority of Americans dislike Latinos.
This is a very serious problem, and we are addressing it at Riverside Unified School District as well.
Which has a significant Latino population.
We have a very significant Latino population, and they're fantastic assets in our community and very involved in the school district, the parents.
I have a friend who's a principal at a junior high school in an inner city area of our state with very large Latino populations. even at this late date, she's reported to me that she's having difficulty having her students focus because so many of the students are afraid that either they will be deported because they may be undocumented or they have family that will be deported. And so they're really struggling to keep these kids focused. And when the teachers are asked, am I going to be deported, the teachers don't know what to say.
Right. And so what we're doing is there's a lot of misperceptions floating around. I mean, the rhetoric during the campaign trail was obviously very intense. And understandably, when people are taking these quotes on face value, it's very troubling. But I think it's important that people know what their rights are, what the facts are. And so at a minimum, because we don't fully know exactly what's going to happen either.
But let's talk about the rights and what rights are, because obviously we live in a government or a country with many layers of government. There's the school board, there's the city, the county, the state, the federal. And the school board can make a pronouncement, for example, many have already made pronouncements, that they will not cooperate with immigration authorities, that they will create safe zones, that they will not allow immigration officials on their campuses unless the superintendent approves or the district approves. But if the federal government makes an edict that schools must allow ICE officials on campus, what does school district to do?
Well, I mean, I think those are questions that are very difficult to wrap our mind around. I know that we have to, irrespective of what the possibilities may be, we have to reinforce ourselves. What are the facts that we do know that we can control? And there is a lot of misperceptions floating around that I think is important that we set the record straight. And I mean, it's not just, like you mentioned, the kids are not necessarily always just concerned about themselves, because many of them were born here, but about the status of their parents. And so that's a whole another conversation too. But the important thing is that the district, we need to have an environment where we can have these conversations.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've spoken with other school board members, and they have to contemplate the following. As you may know, that during the 1960s, the federal government wanted the South to desegregate, and especially desegregate schools. And how did President Johnson desegregate the schools? He said, if you don't desegregate, we're going to pull federal funds. Well, President Trump could do the same. He could say, if you don't let ICE officials on campus to remove undocumented students and or their parents, we're going to pull federal funds.
Well, I mean, for one thing, just as a small anecdote, our school district was actually the first in the nation of a large district size, over 25,000 students, that voluntarily desegregated.
I remember that. I just remembered that.
So we have a history of being very progressive on these national, racial issues. You know, I can only speak for myself. I mean, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I will tell you that we have to foster a learning environment where people feel safe and comfortable to be able to go to school and learn. And whatever we need to do to interface with the federal government to help ensure that, you know, I personally want to be at the forefront and having those conversations.
Is the district getting prepared?
We are. So I actually have been having some recent community meetings where this topic has been coming up, both with staff and with parents and community members. We're gathering information, and we haven't actually formally taken this up as a body, but we are.
I want you to come back and discuss this. And congrats on the meeting in D.C. I want to hear more about restorative justice when we speak next. His name is Angelov Farooq. He is a trustee with the Riverside Unified School Board. I'm Brad Pomerance at Riverside Today. It's Charter Local Edition.